Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. It's been a while since we've had a Michigan Man Extra for you, so here it is, the first one of the new year. When Matt Shepard took the full-time TV job with the Detroit Tigers, it was time to find a new radio voice for Michigan basketball. Although he filled in last year for Matt off and on and handled the pre- and post-game shows, it wasn't a full-time job. That changed in the spring when he was named the official voice of the Wolverines. Joining us next is Brian Boesch, the radio play-by-play voice of Michigan basketball, on our January Extra here on the Michigan Man, in partnership with our friends at SB Nation's Maize and Brew. So stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment this week is Michigan radio play-by-play voice Brian Boesch, also co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, In the Trenches, with John Jansen. So for the first time, welcome to the show, Brian.
No, thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
Well, I think all Michigan listeners to this program and to Michigan basketball are well aware. It's your first full season with the team. You were around last year, but how have you been enjoying your first full year behind the mic?
It's been awesome. I mean, this is a type of job that when I started in this industry, I was hoping just to have a chance at. I did a lot of time in minor league baseball and obviously enjoyed that, but it's a little bit different to be in front of a couple thousand people on a Tuesday night in minor league baseball versus being in front of 12,000 plus at Chrysler or, 15,000 the other night against Nebraska, and to do it with such a great school, a great program, a great coaching staff, a great group of players. I mean, it really has been awesome, and I'm blessed to be here. Plus, with the stuff I've done with football, a little bit of baseball, it's really been a dream come true.
I know all Michigan fans, everyone that I talked to, has enjoyed listening to you this year, and it's been a crazy season in the sense, Brian, that the way it started out, I know I was talking about this last week. When it started out, the team was on fire, and you wondered, wow, is this sustainable? The way we're playing on the offensive end, can we keep this up? And, of course, that's dropped off. But has the season surprised you so far, the way it has rolled out?
I mean, I think where we're at right now, if you didn't know the backstory or the journey of how we got here, I think if you were to say to me at the start of the year, hey, Isaiah Livers is going to miss, at this point, 7 games, and basically 8, because he got hurt so early in that Presbyterian game. But if you tell me that and you tell me their record, I'd say, okay, that seems about right. So it's just how we've gotten there that's been so bizarre. You think back to the battle for Atlantis and the jump to number 4 and, what they did in that heartbreaking loss against Oregon, and then you lose Livers and then you get into a little bit of a slump. I mean, it has been difficult as of late. I think we saw the team get to a high earlier than I think people expected, and they dropped to a low that probably people didn't expect. And really, it's going to be coming down to this final, dozen games of, can Michigan win its way into the tournament? Because let's face it, I mean, unless you lose that game to Nebraska, the road game to Northwestern, the home game coming up against Nebraska late in the season, unless you lose one of those 3 games, you really can't look at a loss in the Big Ten and say, well, that's a bad loss. If you get blown out, that's one thing. But I don't expect that to happen too much from any game in the Big Ten. But eventually you've got to start stacking wins. We'll see if that victory over Nebraska kind of helps it. But I think this team has the winning DNA. They have the talent to get into the tournament and potentially make noise. They just have to find a way to get some victories, and that's why the Illinois loss was so heartbreaking. That's why even going back to the non-conference, if you had that victory against Oregon, that would help a lot considering what the Ducks have become, and that's, I think, a pretty consistent top 15, top 20 team. But there's still plenty of opportunities, but you can't take them for granted. You need several in order to get into the dance.
Well, not having Isaiah Livers, of course, has had a huge impact on the team, Brian. There's no doubt about that. Great to see him back on Saturday, and just like that, out again. Do we have any idea, is it the same injury or is it something new?
It's not the same injury, which is good news, because, A, it's just so difficult to have a timeline with something like that. I think it was interesting when Franz Wagner got hurt. Almost immediately he came out, okay, 4 to 6 weeks, because he kind of knew, with a wrist injury, if you know the severity of it, you kind of have a rough outline, and Franz came back in about 5 weeks. This one, it was interesting because Coach Howard went from indefinitely to day pretty quickly, because it's tough. If you're Franz in that situation, you can still stay conditioned as well as possible. I mean, not basketball shape necessarily, but you can still run around, you can still stay in shape, you can still operate some drills, but just not use that wrist. With Isaiah, it's difficult because you can't really do a whole lot in basketball if your groin's strained. It's just a different style of injury. This is more of the hip area from what I understand. I don't know if he'll play Saturday and what his prognosis is. I mean, he didn't do a ton in the shoot around on Tuesday, I guess it would be, at Nebraska. So it is truly a day-to-day. I don't think it's Coach Howard trying to just mess with people's minds. I mean, he obviously wants to keep it tight to the vest because of the perceived competitive advantage of it. Though coaches are going to prep for Isaiah regardless. I don't know about Saturday, but the people who were immediately thinking, oh man, he might be out for the year, and I'll admit, I didn't say it, but you're worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
If you wait 6 weeks to come, or 5 weeks to come back, you get hurt again, and it looks almost identical to the first injury, you're thinking, oh boy, he might be done for the year. I'd be really surprised if it were that. I think he'll come back a little bit sooner, if not significantly sooner than the injury earlier this season. But again, it really is a day-to-day type of a thing, because there's only so much you can do to work on it and to get ready. I thought he played really well in that game against Illinois, all things considered. Not playing in 5 weeks and going up against a good team. So when he comes back, he can provide that lift. I just always wonder in those situations, Mike, the mental side,
mm-hmm.
because now it's happened twice, and it wasn't the same injury, but it was the same play. And I always wonder that mental side. Is there a brief moment where if you're in that competitive environment, if you flinch, if you think about it? I don't think that'll happen, but it's always a concern for me, especially the second time you get injured in that type of a manner.
Well, it'll be great to see him come back again. Hopefully it will be soon. But the other night in Lincoln against Nebraska, we also went without Xavier Simpson. Of course, we have been hearing about that, talking about that since we found out Monday. Do we have any update on his status and when he might be back, Brian?
I don't. Coach Howard will answer that on Friday, most
mm-hmm.
likely. That's when he has his media availability. I think it's been more of a fact gathering situation with the situation, and obviously you hope he's out there, but it's one of those things. If you're the head coach of a team and your leader does something that violates a team rule, you can't really, well, he's our best player, we have to try to get him back on the floor. You have to take the facts and what you can gather and make the best decision. You have to suspend, Xavier Simpson the same way you would suspend, a walk-on this team. And that's, it's a true defining moment of this program early on in Coach Howard's time. Obviously, there's no denying that he makes this team better, a lot better. Don't have an update. But I'll tell you this. I mean, the way that they fought against Nebraska was, it was not a pretty game. And Nebraska is not very good. You don't want to read too much between the lines from that game. Michigan found a way to get a road victory, which, with the way the season has been going throughout the league, with the recent stretch for Michigan, you just got to find a way to win. And I thought, to me, that's not – if they play that way the rest of the season, in totality, I don't think they're going to make the tournament. But you had to find a way in that situation with so much newness, so many guys in different roles. You had to get that win, and they did. And now you face a significantly better team in Rutgers on Saturday. And really, you're not going to get many more, I won't call them gimmies, but those are the two tap-in putts of the Big Ten. You have to make them. And I've missed plenty of tap-in putts. Got to find a way to make those, and Michigan made the first one.
Absolutely, and it was great to see balanced scoring the other night. And I know it's easier said than done, but as far as a roadmap for the team, that's really what we need to see, more players involved as we wind down the season, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you have a situation where I think Coach Howard, if he's in full strength, he's got an 8-man rotation with the potential to expand as far as 10 if you need to. Without Isaiah and Xavier, it really complicates things. But I think where the Nebraska game could help is in two ways. Listen, we know Eli Brooks can go out and have 20 points and 9 rebounds like he had and run the offense. He just hasn't needed to because of Xavier Simpson. But to me, for Franz Wagner to see, hey, I can have success when I drive to the basket, and to see Brandon Johns know, hey, I can hit a shot. To me, the biggest play of the entire game in Lincoln for the future of this program was in the second half. It was, I think, during that big 19-3 run for Michigan, toward the beginning of it, and Brandon Johns, no hesitation, hit a 3. And for a guy who, I kid you not, he is as impressive of a player as I've seen in my short time in shoot-arounds, in practice. It seems like everything goes in. He's got a really clean-looking shot. It's very fundamental. He seems like he makes 95% in practice or in shoot-around. You get out in the game, and if you have that little flinch, like we talked about with Isaiah, if you have that little flinch, that little hesitation, it totally throws you off. And that was one of the first times this year. He had single digits and threes made, but he caught it. He knew he wanted to shoot it. He knew he was going to make it, and he made it. And to me, I think he's a real wild card for this team, because when Xavier Simpson's back on the floor, you have your 3 guards I think you want to go to battle with. On the inside, where foul trouble can become more of an issue, you've got Teskey, you've got Franz as a small 4. You'll have Isaiah in that 3 or 4 spot, depending on where you want to put him. But you need something else. We saw a little bit from Colin Castleton in that area in his handful of minutes. But Brandon Johns is the guy. And if you can give him significant minutes, and if he can hold his own defensively, if he doesn't make many mistakes, and he's made some here and there, even against Nebraska. But if he can be that scoring threat, that's where when you talk about the floor versus ceiling concept, I think Brandon's got a lower floor than some players, but I think he brings his and the team's ceiling up more than maybe any other of those question marks on the team. You know what you're getting from Xavier. You know what you're getting from Isaiah when he's on the floor. You know what you're getting from Teskey and from Eli. I think those are the 4 known quantities. If you can find a guy like Brandon Johns who can raise collectively, that's where this team can be a real threat. And if that doesn't happen with him, with David Julius, with Austin Davis, whoever it might be, then that's where the floor kind of lowers a bit for this program.
Well, Brian, this Saturday, of course, Rutgers at Madison Square Garden, and they are playing some pretty good ball right now, aren't they?
They are. Give them credit. I mean, that's a really tough place to win. Obviously, if you're on the Big Ten, it's a situation where you kind of wonder, man, what's Rutgers doing in the league? But they've held their own in a lot of sports. The marquee ones has not been the case. But as of late, I mean, they can shoot from the outside decently well, but their interior is where it's at. That's where they want to get it done. And I mean, the contrast between what Nebraska can bring to the table versus Rutgers is significant. And, it's great that we saw, John Teskey do a lot of good work on the inside, Franz Wagner get involved. We saw Brandon Johns with some post-up moves. That's going to be a little bit tougher to come by. It'll be interesting to see how Michigan handles it, because Rutgers can be a threat from the outside, but that's not their game. They don't have a sharp shooter, if you will, but their interior is really impressive. They know what they want to do, and listen, we know what's been the issue for Michigan a lot this year in Big Ten play. Can you slow down the guy in the interior? Mm-hmm. Miles Johnson is not. He's not a huge scoring threat, but he can rebound the basketball, as can Ron Harper. They've got some dudes inside. Can you limit that and then, do what Michigan's tried to do all year and take away the 3-point shot as much as possible? If they do that, they got a real shot. And as we know, MSG's been real kind lately to this program, and we need another big one in there to try to get this thing rolling before a huge couple of games next week at home.
Oh, absolutely. It is a big one. And you're right. After Saturday, 2 at Chrysler, Ohio State on Tuesday, then Michigan State a week from Saturday. And wow, those are just both huge games, aren't they?
They are, because again, you have to get wins, and it's just so much easier in this league, especially this season, to do it at home. If they can find a way, I really think these next 3, if you can go 2-1, and that's a tough ask, because Rutgers and Michigan State are legit teams. Ohio State has a ton of talent, even though they have struggled, kind of like Michigan, since the end of the non-conference slate. If you can find a way to get 2 of 3, obviously 3 of 3 would be amazing. But if you can win 2 of those 3, I think you're right back into, at least externally feeling like, all right, Michigan's in right now. And more importantly, the team's not worried about bracketology and what its potential seed line is going into February. They're trying to stack some wins. And if you can win 2 out of 3 with still some realistic gets down the stretch in the schedule and multiple opportunities at home to pick up some solid victories, that would really help to set the tone. If they go 0-2 again, another homestand, then they're going to be in real trouble. And that's, let's face it, that's a possibility, because Big Ten teams are good pretty much wherever you go. But yeah, I mean, this, to me, you can get away with, losing tough ones on the road to Iowa, to Michigan State, even to Minnesota, even though that was one they probably should have gotten, especially with the way they played early. But you can't keep losing at home. And if they have a similar run to what we saw last week by falling to Penn State and Illinois, they're going to be in a really tough spot.
As we head into this week, we're 12-8 coming into the Rutgers game. So there's 11 games left in the regular season when you look at the calendar. And as we just talked about, it's going to be tough to stack wins in those 11 games. But right now, when you look at it, Brian, how many wins do you think it's going to take for this Michigan team to get into the big dance?
I keep coming back to 19. I feel like if they can find 7 more, and obviously they've, you got to find a way to get some more quality wins. But if you can find a way to get to 19, and I think that even would include the Big Ten tournament, if you can find a way to do that, and I look at it, I think you need at least 2 more road wins. And I say that because you've got Northwestern. That's got to be a win. And then you play at Rutgers, Purdue, Ohio State, and Maryland. Really tough places to play. You can't go over, because then at that point, to me, if I'm looking at it as a committee member and I see a team that's got 1 or 2 road wins and they're against Nebraska and Northwestern, to me that's a bit of a concern. But if you can find a way to go to Piscataway, to West Lafayette, to Columbus, to College Park, and get a win against one of those 4 teams, obviously we'll take as many as we can get. But to me, they've got to get at least 2 the rest of the season. Go in with 3 road victories. Not great, but still, it's not something that's going to stick out like a sore thumb. And when you have, we've seen teams get in with that weird-looking, I think there was an 18-14 team last year in the dance, and that's because the team came out of a tough conference. You're going to see 1 or 2 of those in the NCAA tournament this year out of the Big Ten, because it's, from top to bottom, it's just significantly better than any other conference in college basketball. Maybe it doesn't have the top-heavy 1 or 2, but I think that's a byproduct of how deep the league is. Because perception-wise, if you see a 10-loss team on Selection Sunday, you think, oh, well, they can't be one of the top 5 teams in the nation. It's got to be Duke out of the ACC or Baylor, who's been great. But I think they got to get to 19. If you get to 20, no doubt you're in. But as we know, we haven't had to talk about this much over the last few years. You have to worry about bid stealers. You got to root for the favorites in the bigger conferences like Dayton and San Diego State, and obviously Gonzaga. Gonzaga continuing to win is helpful for Michigan. It's a unique situation to be in, but hopefully Michigan can take care of business. You don't have to worry about it, and you're just thinking, well, are we gonna be out west, or are we gonna be in the Midwest? Where are we gonna be? Can we avoid that 8-9 line and not play a 1 seed in the second round, et cetera, et cetera? Regardless, got to keep winning, and to me, you've got to find a way to get at least a couple more on the road.
Well, final question for you, Brian, then we'll let you get away. And actually, it's 2 questions in one, but how many Big Ten teams do you think at this point we might see in the NCAA tournament? And from the teams you've seen so far in the schedule, who looks like the best team in the Big Ten to you?
Boy, that changes pretty much every week, doesn't it? I mean, it really is crazy. I'll tell you what. I mean, when you look at this thing, from top to bottom, I mean, it's tough not to say Michigan State because of what they've done. Their two losses are, one was close on the road and one was a blowout. It kind of sticks out. Now, they've got a tougher schedule down the stretch. I think you probably have to go with Michigan State as the team that, has been the best one. I'd put Illinois up there, though. I mean, that's the one other team I'm thinking, boy, they might actually be the real deal. I mean, what Ayo Dosunmu did against Michigan in some other situations, I mean, they're legit. I still, with Maryland, I still really wonder, can they be, a team that finds a handful of tough wins? It's just a program thing. I got to see it to believe it with them. Iowa, I think what they've done has been impressive because early on in the season, their defense was atrocious, but they've been able to outscore teams. I mean, they've been basically top 10 in Ken Pom offense the whole season. And we can't forget about Rutgers. I mean, that's a team. Rutgers isn't going to beat itself. They're going to do things the right way. They're going to play fundamental basketball. They're not going to be intimidated. I think that's, and that's kind of following the standings right now. But I'd probably go Michigan State, Illinois, and then probably Maryland just based on talent. But Rutgers, Iowa, I was impressed with what I saw from Penn State. And, I think this is a league this year where, normally if you go on a 3-game win streak or a 3-game losing streak, it doesn't do a whole lot for you in the grand scheme of the conference. But this year in the Big Ten, especially when you get away from the top 2 and the bottom 2, that 3 through 12, if you win or lose 3 straight, we saw what happened in the losing streak for Michigan. They bottomed out. And they're tied for 12th, I guess, coming into play today, ahead of just Nebraska Northwestern. But yeah, I mean, think about that. Right now, Ohio State and Michigan might have to suit up on the first day of the Big Ten tournament. And it's not a knock on those teams. It's just how deep it is. You eventually have to find wins, no doubt. But I mean, it's just a dogfight. In terms of how many get in, I mean, everyone who thinks 12 is going to happen, I just don't think there's going to be enough spreading out of the wealth in the league to get to that point. But I've been saying 10 pretty much the whole year. I think you're gonna find a way because every year it feels like, boy, the bubble isn't great. And if you show me an 8-12 Big Ten team that had a decent non-conference, and I just don't think you're going to find 67 other teams to have a better claim than that. I wouldn't be surprised to see 1 or 2 Big Ten teams in Dayton coming up for the first 4. I'd be surprised if there weren't at least 1 Big Ten team there, considering how this is all going to break down. But, to me, 12's tough, but I think 10's I would say a safe bet, just based on how deep this league has been and how well most of the teams play during the non-conference.
Well, our guest today on our Game Day segment has been Michigan radio play-by-play voice Brian Boesch, on with us for the first time. And Brian, it's been a pleasure having you with us. It's going to be a crazy last 11 games heading into the Big Ten tournament. So we appreciate the time and hope we can get you back in the coming weeks.
You got it, Mike. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again to Brian Boesch for joining us today. He's doing a great job calling the play-by-play and will be back with us later in the season. That will do it for our first Michigan Man Extra of the new year. We'll be back next week on our regular day talking more Michigan hoops. Our guest will be one of the best basketball writers in the country, Brendan Quinn from The Athletic Detroit. So make sure you join us. Until then, I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. Take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!